It's about time to get with the program.
Hey, so Chris, you mentioned that LePage didn't want to go forward with the Medicaid expansion, so Utah is in the same boat.
Yeah.
We basically had an escrow account saving the money for the Medicaid. We actually have a voter proposition that was voted on, Prop 3, and it passed overwhelmingly, and now the legislation is going to try and retard it in much the same way that LePage said, oh, you guys want it? Well, go fuck you, because fuck you. So it's really interesting, and it sucks that people have to go through this pain, but unfortunately I think this is the only way we get progress, is by pushing for something, forcing these people to raise their hands to show how anti-democratic they are, and hopefully piss off enough people who decide that they want to actually run and change something about it.
Oh my God! Hey, wait a minute, Josh. Guess what?
What?
We're live. Hey, everybody.
Oh my gosh, that's right. Oh shit, we didn't introduce. Oh,
we did nothing
snap.
at all.
So here we are, another day.
Yeah,
another day.
Jesse's here too.
We're all excited.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening.
Jesse's down south, and we have with us a very
We're all
special
excited.
guest,
We have a special guest with us,
Johnny Progress, aka Johnny Akzam. How's it going?
How's it going, everybody? How's it going?
Well, in the last episode, we mentioned that maybe we need somebody to come on here and tutor us on a little bit of MMT, because we got talking about taxes and people paying their fair share and covering the cost of things that the government does. And, I've been reading a little bit of John Loritz lately, and I have to say this definitely is something that I think more of the public needs to understand. And John, who better than somebody who's kind of deep in it, especially with the federal jobs guarantee, which I think is kind of tied to this scenario, than Johnny Akzam to explain it to us.
Well, thank you. Yeah. By any means, I'm not an economist. Okay. I'm an activist. But what's interesting about the way money works is even economists will tell you that economists aren't the best people to tell you how money works in society. Sociologists and archaeologists, anthropologists that understand how civilization works are the best people to talk to you about money, because money is a mechanism of society. It is how we provision. It's how it's usually governments. When we speak of government, I'm going to speak about it in the United States realm, so that people understand what our actual authority is.
Yeah.
But all money is, it doesn't matter what you use. Okay. All money is a mechanism of us to agree upon, to standardize for exchange of goods and services. That's all it is. Back in the day, they teach you that we started from a barter system, and anthropologists will tell you that's not true. The earliest writings known to exist happen to include accounting.
Yeah.
So they're accounting on clay tablets and keeping track of things, because very early on people understood how do you exchange two swords for how many chickens, and then how many cows equal how many chickens for how many swords. And so also, when you look at the history of money and how it's used, it was usually for provisioning what? Military.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay?
Expansion
That's
of the
what
territory.
It was for, because now these troops would come in and they would need food and shelter and things like that in different areas. And how were they to exchange? So money, not necessarily in the form of coinage, but in the form of weights and measures. The reason we have the pound and things like that is because it was used as a form of weight measurement for wheat. Okay. And that was the gauge upon which we used. Now, in the United States and in other countries, sometimes what they've done and what they do is they peg their currency to a commodity, which is what we did with gold and silver.
Yeah.
Right? And that what that did was it created this exactly what you think it is, right? If you print more dollars, then the value of the dollar goes down because each dollar is pegged to a certain weight measurement in gold.
That's what we all learned in school. Yeah.
That's exact. But that was true back up until 1971. And even before 1971, FDR removed us from the gold standard temporarily to take care of the war.
Yeah.
Right? That's what happened during World War II. Is we didn't have to raise taxes to pay for the war. People didn't buy bonds to pay for the war. What happened was after the war started and there were fewer resources, which I'll get into inflation a little bit later, but there were fewer resources able to be used. Like they stopped making commercial, or not commercial, but vehicles, right? Pennies, things like that, because all those natural resources and the human resources to develop and to produce those natural resources had to go toward the war effort. Okay. So what they did was they offered people freedom bonds after the fact so that they wouldn't have this extra cash to go out and spend into the economy, that there was no goods for them to spend on. That's what causes inflation, is when people say, well, that's going to cause inflation. My first question is, on what? What is going to get inflated? We experience market-forced inflation, for instance, when a video game comes out, right? Or a video console.
The pre-order pricing and all that stuff. Yeah.
That is scarcity before the fact. That is saying we anticipate the demand is so high that we can raise the price of a console to $500 when it comes out, even though in 3 months it's going to drop half the price because, and nothing changes. As a matter of fact, it's even gotten some software updates and things like that. But the material that goes into building the console, the labor and everything hasn't changed for that console. Just the marketing, the manipulation of the market has changed. Okay, so that scarcity.
I'm actually. I really like that you brought up the gaming console. One thing in particular, as I understand, like with the PlayStation 3, if you recall, when that first came out, it had a 3-tiered system, like an 80 gig that was $600, 60 gig I think that was $500, and a 40 gig that was $300. And they being Sony, basically expected to lose about $1,000 per console for something like the first 18 months, if I recall, of them being sold, but they knew it was going to offset through just selling video games. So Sony, a private business, realized that there are areas that it's worth dipping into the red for because it's offset by other areas that are connected to it that are well into the black that help lift it up. And we've got this in infrastructure. It's worth going into the red for infrastructure so people can actually get the jobs and
let
create
me stop you
value.
there because you're going off the rail with going into the red. Okay, and I don't want people to get confused, because what Sony did and what they do is not what our federal government can do. And this is where we get into the whole idea of taxes do not fund the federal government.
Okay.
The federal government is the issuer of the currency. They create the spending power with every appropriations bill. Okay, it's like the monopoly banker issuing currency to each player to start the game. If you don't tax the players first to get their money, they have no money. There are no taxes to be created or spent or anything, because there is no money into the game. Okay, so the first thing that must happen after everybody's chosen their identity and rolled to see who has the privilege to go first is the banker passes out money so that it provisions the game. A national government is the entire game, right? And so it is upon in the realm of, say, like the game analogy, the banker would be the Fed. Okay, the Fed is commissioned with crediting the accounts of the Treasury departments, of the departments in the Treasury, so that they are funded. And all that happens when we say, okay, we're going to spend $1 trillion in the military, then the Fed puts numbers like a scorekeeper over on that side and says, okay, now the Defense Department has, boom, $1 trillion. There you go. That's all that happens. It's like keeping score on a scoreboard. The scorekeeper doesn't have to get points from anybody in the game. He doesn't have to borrow points from another stadium in order to give the teams their points as they acquire them. What taxes do, there's 5 main functions of taxes. We're going to talk about just a couple of them because they're the main issue of what we're talking about. The main purpose of taxation on the federal level. Remember, we are not talking about state or local. Every state, local entity is a currency user, just like me and you. Therefore, they do have a revenue to balance. They have to have taxes come in. A state has to have taxes come in. So where we have states that have a high surplus, like California and all this other stuff, and then we have states that have a deficit, that's because we're competing in the game for the same amount of money among ourselves. We don't get to go in our basement and start printing dollars, or we don't have an app on our phone that we can just credit money to our bank account like the federal government can do. Okay? So when the federal government says you can have this, we're going to put $1 trillion into the federal, for military.
Right.
What was I saying? No, I'll go back to taxes. So what are taxes for? That's the question. What are they for? Well, we impose taxes as a government. And when I say we, it's because we, the people, are supposed to be our government, right?
I like to say that a lot.
We impose these taxes in order to create a demand for that dollar, so that now you and me decide to use it as a standard currency. Because if you don't impose a tax, and here's an example, a small island didn't have, and there's that one island that we just came into the news where they have no connection with the world. Well, this happened, figure back in the days of colonialism. This happened a lot. The Spanish or Portuguese, I can't remember who it was, but it's not really important who it was. The story is that they find this island of people. They live in huts. They're a tribal community. They hunt and gather, and they take care of each other. Right? A barter system only works in a tribal society where you have these resources that you all work together, and you say, "Oh, you found this, and I could have that," and you take a fish, and that works there. But what happened was they came and they said, "Oh, there's a lot of coffee on this island, and so they built a coffee factory, and they wanted the people that lived there, the inhabitants, to work at the coffee plantation." Well, they had no incentive to. They lived in their huts. They were fine. They hunted. They gathered. What incentive did they have to go and work at the coffee plant? Yeah. They had none. So then they created, let's say, whatever, I'll use the biblical denarii, okay? The denarii was what they were going to pay them. And they said, well, we'll give you 10 denarii if you come work in our plant. Well, they said, okay, great. But what do I need those for? What do I need those for? Because when I go hunting or I go fishing or somebody creates a basket in my tribe, I don't need these to trade them with. So what they did was they said, well, we're going to charge you 10 denarii a month for your freedom, basically. And if you don't pay us these 10 denarii, now that we're here, we're going to burn your huts down. So it was an imposition of taxation.
Pretty fucking gangster, if you ask me.
That is exactly what it is. But in a modern society, look at it as a mechanism to provision ourselves. Okay, so in that instance, that's what happened. So that's just an example of what taxes do. So they said, we're going to burn down your huts if you don't pay these taxes. So now they're imposed to go work at that plant to earn those 10, maybe whatever. Now, what happens in that tribe? There's some people who don't work at the plant, so they don't earn any of those, but maybe they cook things, and the plant pays them 15 a month, not just 10. So they have a little bit extra. So that's how that monetary system starts accumulating. But the imposition still stands. The laws, like if we don't pay our taxes, you're going to go to jail, they're going to seize our property, they're going to do whatever the law provides. They're going to burn down their hut if they don't pay that $10. And the only way to get that 10 denarii is to go work at that plant because that's the only place available that's passing it out. They've created themselves as the government there. So now take that to our society where we exist. We say, okay, well, we do want a standardized society, a standardized means of payment, so that people can exchange, because that's all money is. That's all it's for. It's an arbitrary representation of wealth. Even a gold coin, being used as a coin, is only a representation of its value to the state it belongs to.
Right.
Okay. As a commodity, the gold in weight melted down is worth something, but as the coin in of itself, it fluctuates. So in our fiat monetary system, which just means free flowing, means it's not pegged to any commodity like gold. It's not pegged. I'm fighting with Nico House about this. I love that kid. He's so brilliant, but he believes in the petrodollar. The petrodollar exists to the extent that it exists, but it is not what our dollar in the United States is pegged to. It's another mechanism of exchange in the foreign market that is pegged to a commodity, but it is not what our U.S. dollar is pegged to. And if the market crashed on that or something, it wouldn't affect our ability in the United States to provision for ourselves by spending money in, for instance, go back to the monopoly analogy. Let's say, for instance, I don't know, we all had our house rules for free parking, right?
Yeah.
Do you put the taxes in free parking, or do you put 500?
I used to put everything in the middle.
Right.
And if you get free parking, boom.
Right. And then when you land on free parking, it's like a lottery for the player, right?
Yeah.
But the same thing exists in essence when you go around Go, right? When you pass Go and get $200 from the banker, does the banker turn to all of the players and collect a tax from them to pay you that $200?
Not at all.
Not at all. They just reach over there. And here's another interesting thing about the game. It even tells you in the rules that if you're to run out of paper money, now remember, this was made way back before we had
socialism wasn't a dirty ass word, I think.
Well, but it was made. Yeah, we didn't have video, machines, video copiers or anything like that.
Yeah.
But back in the day, it said if you ran out, just keep track on a piece of paper. So if you ran out of money, you could actually give a player an IOU for, say, $10,000, and they could give you those bills back, and they are still utilizing, because the idea, if you wanted the game to continue going on, you would just keep provisioning the game by putting money into the game. So that's what
credit
brings
system.
This whole influx of MMT and how we're free to spend. Now, that doesn't mean that we just start funneling money into every damn thing that is loose out there, because that creates this issue about inflation. So what is inflation? Inflation is not having too much money in the system. That has nothing to do with the amount of money. What inflation is the inability of that money to actually put the human and natural resources in that society to work. So, like I said, we experience inflation if there's a run on something. So now everybody has money in their pocket and they all decide they want to buy an iPhone because they can afford it. So iPhones become scarce. So those get inflated. Now that doesn't mean that everything gets inflated. However, the reason people make this connection with inflation the way they do is because back when the oil crash happened and oil prices skyrocketed, what happens? With something like oil, not an iPhone, it affects everything, because everything
distribution,
every bit of energy we have, every single car ride we do, every light that's on, everything is reliant on fossil fuels and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that is the inflation of that is going to cause the inflation. We saw that same thing happen toward the end of Bush's time when prices went up, right? I was a contractor at the time, and the cost of gasoline was up almost $4 frickin', and to drive a four-wheel drive truck around, to different job sites around town turned twice as expensive. So people started looking for cheaper vehicles. They started going less. They started using public transportation. I mean, it affected everything. The cost of lumber went up.
I remember people complaining about orange juice and milk, particularly. Being such a big goddamn deal that people couldn't buy it anymore. Yeah.
And so when we talk about inflation, we have to talk about what is being inflated, first of all. And then we have to look at why. Why are those resources scarce? It's not because there's too much money. It's because the demand, I mean, yes, it could be because people have money to spend. However, the reason for any specific inflationary concern is not because there's too much money. It's because there are not enough resources to fill the demand. So if we wanted to give everybody a pony, see, Stephanie Kelton, when you were talking about people earlier that you were looking into for MMT,
yeah,
I tell you, go on YouTube, look up Stephanie Kelton. That's it. That's all you got to do. Look up Stephanie Kelton. She explains things so easily. Of course, she's not the only one, right? She's only part of a much huger mechanism. It's a movement, really, and it's a movement of not just economists that believe a certain way. It's a movement of people who understand, like we're talking about, how money works in a society, how it's supposed to work, right? We shouldn't be gangsters, like you're talking about. We should be utilizing this mechanism to provision the way we want to provision. We want to give people Medicare for all because the money doesn't really matter as long as we have enough doctors, nurses, hospitals, staff, medical devices, equipment. All those things are what we have to worry about when it comes to Medicare for all. Not whether we can pay for them, but whether or not we have enough of that to go around for everybody so that there's not some kind of run on it.
So really, the bigger one big key to this would be that it's more about keeping the money in motion rather than making sure that the money exists to represent something else.
Well, yes, absolutely. That's a good way of putting it, is it's in flow. If there's one player, see, our game should not be Monopoly, right? The way the mechanisms work, and I make this clear, is I utilize that analogy because that is how the mechanisms work. However, our end goal should not be that one player is a winner or that two players accumulate all the wealth and everybody else goes hungry. So now we start writing our own house rules, right?
Yeah.
We start saying, we're going to play Monopoly like socialists. And we're going to, maybe for instance, I thought about this the other day. I was thinking, okay, what if we owned the waterworks and the electric company and the railroads, and that was government owned on the board? And when you landed on them, instead of paying, you got a dividend.
Everybody gets a little bit. Yeah.
Right. And so we start changing the rules of the game so that it's not to feed the capitalist, because that game was to show how capitalism devours itself.
Oh, geez, somebody needs to get on this. I don't know why that's not a fucking board game yet.
Well, they've been talking about it for years, and there's actually one guy who wrote an article on how the rules should be put out. And I actually created my own chess game called Royal Chess. So it's really interesting me to do that because I like doing that, man. I probably could have been a game creator, like that, because, well, when we were kids, we used to create our own rules for games, just to, like, even softball, or we played this game called wall ball where we threw a softball up against a racquetball court. Remember having the concrete racquetball courts at school?
Right.
Yep. And so we were out there and we had a broken bat. And we didn't have a racquetball, any of that stuff, right? So we had this softball, and we'd throw it, and so the pitcher had to bounce it off of the wall. It'd come back, it had to bounce once, and the guy with the broken bat standing on the other side of the line had to hit it, and then you turned around and you had to try to stop it, and if it went over, then it was a home, right? We made our own rules, and I remember we played that, like, for the longest time, and it was all because we found a broken bat, So we can do the same thing, and we have to understand that what we can do with the game of Monopoly, we should be doing in our society, because we are the rule makers.
That's what I was starting to think as you were describing that. Is as adults, we got to remember how we were as kids. Like, as long as everybody agreed to the new rule change and they all felt that they weren't getting shafted by it, everybody
Right.
agreed to it. And then
That's
it
right.
was just a thing. It just became into existence. Why can't we do that with our own society?
And we can and we should, and that's what these conversations are about, right? Is
Goddamn
So-
right, man.
So I have a question.
Go ahead, question.
Okay. So like I said, I mean, when figured out what the topic was going to be for this one, I've been reading a lot on MMT just for the last even couple of hours. And if we did the MMT theory and actually put that into practice, what I see the biggest problem is going to be is you've got too many of the quote unquote big corporations, like too big to fail, Walmart, Amazon and the like. How much are we going to be able to even get in the current environment where you've got Amazon who's going to make more on corporate welfare potentially than he will in profits with this new deal that he's got going in, what is it, West Virginia or Virginia and New York? These are the things that I see that are
What
going
is
to be
your
the
question?
biggest
What does that
points.
have to do with how our economy works? See, MMT is not what people have to understand is we're not implementing anything. MMT is not, we're going to implement this. MMT is an explanation of how it already works. What I'm telling you is MMT. What I'm telling you is that we have the ability to put as much into free parking as we want to. Now, we can choose to put it in free parking, or we can choose to put it in the electric company.
Other
or
infrastructure portions. Yeah.
Or like I said, we could choose to put, we could change different things around on the board and say, okay, so you land in free parking, you get 500. If you land in waterworks, you get 200. If you land in this, you get this. And that not everything that you land on in society is a rentier thing that's taking away from you. Now, just to clarify that MMT is already being used. It's been used. It's how we govern. Okay.
It's just that the society doesn't understand, or most of us don't get that that's what happened.
Right.
I think
So when they gave all these big
tax,
tax cuts to the wealthy, and then they turned around and they spent that same amount in the military, that was the utilization of MMT, because they were saying we don't have to raise taxes, we don't have to get funding from taxation in order to spend. They just demonstrated it. The problem isn't that we're spending, just real quick, it isn't that we're spending, it's what we're spending on.
Absolutely. And, okay, we got 7 minutes left before the break, sir, but I have a question for you, and I think it might cover what Mr. Cheney was shooting at, because it's definitely the thing that grinds me up the most. With everyone arguing over the tax levels and wanting progressive tax things, I think AOC brought that up. And then we learned that big corporations cheat on their taxes. We learned that the rich keep money in the Caymans or something in order to relieve that from taxation. And all of this avoidance stuff, it seems like they're operating on the gold standard methodology, which then makes us read something like MMT and think that it's not actually the way things are.
Well,
so
no,
I'm
what they're
wondering,
doing.
why should we be mad that they're avoiding taxes on their on their money?
So
I
that
guess
has to do with wealth and income inequality.
Okay.
That just has to do with hoarding and concentrating freaking wealth because they're greedy. They're playing Monopoly. And we have to, in a separate case, we have to make a separate case for that. Paying for things like the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, college for all, student debt cancellation. Those are kind of the four big ones, right? That cost. Paying for those things have nothing to do with how much taxes the rich are paying. Absolutely zero. I just told you that because we cut taxes and then we spent a bunch of money. Now, we'll get into the debt in the next conversation. But the reason that we approach the 70% tax rate, the marginal tax rate, taxing the wealthy like now Warren is talking about, the reason we take those approaches is because they are hoarding all the frickin' wealth. And now they have all this money. Now, if they have it sitting over in the Cayman Islands, they're sitting on it. It's not doing anything. And it goes back to Chris's point. It's not circulating in the economy through like their employees. However, it's not a danger until they pull it over here and they use it.
I see.
The
So
problem is that they have the access to utilize it to influence our democracy, to influence, to gobble up more because now 6 companies own all the media and all that shit. So that's what we're trying to stop by taking away from them. It's not to pay for anything.
So we're in a swords and arrows war, and every now and then the 1% pop up with a machine gun.
Right. for the most part.
Well, for a shitty analogy.
Yeah, I mean, but it does boil down to that over the course of the last 50 years, as taxes started getting cut and we started seeing, the graph on Pavlina's deal, the 90%, 10%, and how the gaps have been widening for those of us who are in the 90% are not making the prosperity and the wage stagnation, right? We see that the GDP and prosperity and production has gone up, but the average wage stagnation. We've been sharing these charts. I can share them with you guys.
Yeah. Hey, man, I live that chart.
Those charts are showing what's happening.
I'd like to
with the tax.
I'd like to pipe in real quick to have a better, make sure that I fully comprehend what we're talking about here. So MMT is effectively when a bank gives you a digital representation of money that says you now have $10,000. They don't literally give you $10,000 worth of bills. And so then you can turn around and say, I'm going to go ahead and put this into some sort of market investment, whether say infrastructure, like the Eisenhower infrastructure bill, something where that it's going to have some sort of return on investment, where in this case it was 100-to-1 return on investment. The amount of money that you put into it, you get $100 per dollar you put into it back into the economy. So like where you said that oil is so far reaching, it touches everything, so is like Medicare for all, or so is infrastructure. If you have roads, you can get goods and services to and fro the entire country. If you have people who are healthy, then they can literally be active in the economy, and then it feeds back in because it's so far reaching into everything. And then if there comes a point where the value of the dollar starts to exceed the value of the good or service you're providing, then you start to tax it a little bit in order to just kind of reduce that. And that's kind of the idea of affecting the inflation.
There's much more into it. Taxation is not the only way to control inflation. You control inflation by, remember, inflation is only resemble or caused by a reduction in the real resources available that you're trying to use that money for. Okay. Now, people can play with inflation, falsely manipulate things like prices and things like we saw in oil and with the video games, but that's false manipulation. We're trying to stick within the realities of how what you first said about MMT is basically going to the banks and getting money. That's not true. That's not what MMT is at all. MMT is not. MMT says that we have. I mean, it's hard to explain when you keep trying to box MMT into an explanation, because it's not a theory of economics in the sense that if you try this, it's going to do this. This is how shit works.
It's an explanation of what actually exists.
It's not.
We need to learn how to wield it,
and it hasn't been tried. We're showing you that most of what they're doing is lying to you when they say we have to raise taxes to pay for shit. That's the biggest thing, because that's not what taxes on the federal level do. When we get into the deeper aspects of, like, if something were to become inflationary, and we can talk about that with the infrastructure program in the next segment. Just let me know when we're got to cut off, because there's a misconception between the job guarantee and an infrastructure program, and we'll get into why that's different and how they're funded differently and why they're funded differently. But the infrastructure program, for instance, is something that if we invest into incorrectly, and we go into full blown without any kind of thought, will cause inflation on all of those materials, right? So concrete, road materials, things like that if we start pulling away from what's actually being done now. Now, what most of us understand is that we're in such a deflationary period right now.
Sorry, Johnny. And with that, we'll be right back to let him continue his sentence. We'll be right back. Hey everybody, Guess who I got with me today? It's Corey Henderson, the technology director for Our Voice USA, and he has an update, a long-awaited update, an update that hasn't come in a long time, and now it's here, and he's ready to explain it to us. Corey, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. So what we've been working on is a management piece to the Our Voice USA canvassing app. As you know, the canvassing app works great for small campaigns when you don't have very many people to manage, but the more people you add, the more difficult it becomes. Now, this new product is called Hello Voter, and you run it on a web browser. You log into it and you can see anyone who canvasses for you, sort them into teams, and assign them turf.
Oh, okay. So it's like the hub, the main hub, the headquarters for the manager of the campaign, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, I get it.
So when you log in, you get a dashboard that tells you what's going on, and then you can click to see if there are any new canvassers that are ready to canvass for you, and you can assign them to a team or you can deny them access. Because just because they show up in your system doesn't mean they can see anything. You have to approve them or deny them.
So through all this, the person who is running the campaign is still in full control of like who is going to work with them and like what kind of data they collect. That's all still just inside their own computer, correct?
That's correct. And when you assign someone a turf, they can only see the data in that turf. And when you assign someone to a team, they can only see the members of that team.
Cool. So there's like low incidence of people being able to mess with the whole system from the other side.
Right. And this also means that you can manage people that you've never met who live on the other side of the country. Say you're running a national campaign of some sort and you're in New York and someone in California wants to do their part locally. So they download the Our Voice USA mobile app and enter your campaign address into the connect to server option. And it flags that person in New York and they approve them for a turf where they live, and they can see any data that they might have for that area, and any data they collect in the area feeds back to the person in New York.
Well, that's awesome.
So imagine
that's a major expansion.
Imagine sending out an email or posting on social media, hey, download this app, enter this into the Connect to server, and then suddenly the next morning you have 500 people you need to sort out what to do with them.
Wow. And then you hire a manager for that part.
Yeah. So rather than spending thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on software that's available today to even have this opportunity to sort those 500 volunteers, now you're not paying a dime to do that. The money you would have spent on the software, you're now spending on someone to help you manage it.
On the person power. Exactly. Yeah, man. I really like that. That's cool. So this kind of thing, I could see maybe, not to throw a deadline on you, but a 2022 campaign being able to span the country with something like this?
Oh, it's most certainly in its current form ready for a campaign right now.
Oh, my. So somebody running for 2020 could potentially reach out and help finish this thing off.
Yeah, it's functional at the moment. It's a little rough around the edges. But as we've seen with the mobile app, it got better over time. The same applies here. You can run a campaign on it right now. There might be some pain points that we can address with a little time. And by the 2020 primaries, we're hoping that a lot of that has been flushed out.
Well, hell, if there's anybody out there looking to run a national campaign in 2020 and they'd like to show that the power of the people can beat the power of the oligarch, I would have to say that this would be the opportunity of the lifetime.
Yeah, and not even just national campaign, just a local campaign too. Like I said, with the mobile app in its current form, with Dropbox, it's difficult to manage more than just a small campaign. But if you have 30, 40, 50 volunteers, this makes it so much easier to manage your mayoral campaign for the 2019 local elections or city council. And maybe you can even double up and have, because what I've noticed is a lot of campaign managers manage more than one campaign.
Right. Okay, so how stupid of me to even overlook that. So any kind of campaign, not just the national, however, it could handle the national. And you're saying too that like campaign managers, consultants who operate with multiple campaigns in different jurisdictions and whatnot, they could manage all of them with this Hello Voter system. Right,
because if you're helping a city councilman out in Salt Lake City, but you're also helping out a mayor in Provo, and if you're also, and these are Utah towns, by the way.
Yeah, right.
I know you're helping someone run for Congress in congressional district too. There's like almost no overlap between those, so they can all exist in the same system, and we'll be all completely independent of each other
and not breaking any federal election commission laws.
Also, and perhaps most importantly, is the data stays in your system. It doesn't come to Our Voice USA. It does not go to a corporation or government. It is your data.
I do love decentralized data.
And it is what you make of it. And you can make it anything you want. You're not constrained by another system's, you must ask these questions. You can't have your own custom questions.
That is, and and just to throw this out there, you don't even have to use it for a political campaign. The sky's the limit on what you can do with the app. Am I correct in understanding it that way?
Oh yeah, if you wanted to, if you were a door-to-door salesman and you wanted to keep track of where you've been, this would work for that too. Nice. Or kids with like magazine routes, anything. Okay. Wow, Corey, I have to say, that's pretty excellent. We've all been waiting for the next major expansion on that front, and it seems that you have cracked that code once again. As far as the skin of it, we all know that's coming down the road, but the functionality alone is what wows me, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. And if you don't mind me saying, go to the Our Voice USA YouTube channel and watch the demo I posted of it.
Yep, and we're going to totally put a link to that in this. So, well, Corey, is there any other magic coming down the road after this update? Is there something else we can anticipate maybe in the near future?
I do have something that you personally would like very much.
Oh yeah, what's that?
The web-based politician search. I'm about to go ham on it.
He said, baloney, I'm going ham on the web-based search. That's awesome. That's my favorite search engine you've created. You can type anything into that thing, and it's going to pop up a politician that you can then go and call and tell them what to do.
Whatever that may be.
And people will be able to do a little bit more research, at least having links to being able to find more information on these people, right?
Yes.
Oh boy, that is going to be scrumptious. Okay, well, Corey, I am so grateful that you stopped by the podcast to let us all know what's coming next. As always, man, Godspeed on your fast-moving fingers, and hopefully people out there, anybody interested in contributing, can go to GitHub/OurVoiceUSA and check out the stuff that Corey's putting in the repositories. If you know anything about this and you've got a spare few, 3,000 hours you have to put into this stuff?
Even just a couple of hours,
Even just a couple of hours. Help take care of my boy here. He needs to take a break. He needs some French fries.
I don't get that reference.
It doesn't make any sense. Corey, thank you very much for coming by. Take care, sir.
I'm glad to be here. Have a good one.
All right. And we're back.
Yeah, let's have you finish up your thought, and then I'd like to transition to some more interesting things with what you're doing, Johnny.
Okay, great. Because I did want to finish that thought on the explanation of MMT, and because you mentioned something about the banks. Say what you said again. Basically, MMT, the banks give you money.
So as I understand, the way that the money flows isn't even like, here is a hard good. Here's $10,000. I'm going to give you $10,000 in bills. The banks effectively operate in a digital representation, and bloop, now you have $10,000. And so then you can now use that money to flow into the economy however you would
right.
operate.
So we don't necessarily print every freaking dollar to represent the offset that we did when we had gold, right? So that is true. Now, so everything, but I wanted to make sure that we're clear on the relationship with banks. Banks don't create the money, so people understand that. Banks are a mechanism. They're most of them are being misused. They're capitalist, taking high loan rates, things like that, rather than having the freedom to get a loan at a low rate and be able to buy a home and stuff like that. So they're very much vultures. However, and there are changes in the MMT world that address banking in particular. Okay, so we don't ignore banking, but when we talk about money being created from the government, we're talking about two different types of money in the banking and the government sectors. Okay, the government sector creates what's called high-powered money. That is the monopoly banker putting money into the game. Okay, bankers are authorized and through the guarantee of government to create lending and credit. Okay, so they don't necessarily, like when we talk about the debt rising because when there's more players. See, our national debt, real quick, is the representation of all the money that's in play. So if we have 3 players, each one gets $1,500. That's $4,500 that represents our national debt. What does that mean? Does that mean that the government or that the players now have to turn around and give that back to the banker? No, it's the money that the banker put into the game, because that's how much currency it takes for each player to circulate to have a game. Now, if we decide, okay, Josh, you get to play, and we don't put any restrictions, even though you started late and this and that, and we say, give him his $1,500, now our national debt goes up to $6,000. Why? Because there's another player in the game. So our national debt, it should be rising with the population. As we get more people coming in, we should be putting more money into the game, because more people need that money to play with. If we don't put more money into the game, then those people are going to be struggling, fighting back and forth. Now, okay, we're going to say, well, you guys started late, so we're going to give both of you $750. So now there's 2 people in the game, but they only get $750 to play with, and then so on and so forth. So the national debt is a farce. We don't like to. I always use quotes. Most economists always will, or economic activists. I like to say economic activists because they're lawyers, they're sociologists, they're archaeologists. They're all in the same, group. But that's when we talk about, the difference between what people think where the hell do they think we're borrowing money from? The banker, when you start the game, doesn't borrow money from another game to start the game. It's given the authority to write that, to say, here. I mean, you could start a game with everybody gets $3,500.
Yeah.
It's totally up to the rule setters. Okay, now go on with something else.
Okay, so wait. Quick question. Okay, so then that being said, then basically everything I've been taught my entire life about the national debt, it's pointless. It's just
absolutely
it's imaginary numbers.
Hallelujah.
You
know what I mean?
It's a position in politics, I guess.
Right, but the question I've always had that no one's ever been able to answer is, okay, so let's say, I don't know, we found vibranium in Utah, and now we found an element that the U.S. owns. Okay, so then you start thinking, the economic route where, okay, so if we've got such a high national debt, if we had some way to get out of that national debt, but there is no national debt. It's like you said, it's the money that the government pumped in to play the game. Well, then why do we focus on that national debt number so hard when it's so pointless?
Okay, here's the answer. Because just about every single politician has come up from below. They've all come up from their household. They've all come up from a mayor's office or a state office where they all had budgetary constraints.
Where that's all true.
Yes, you cannot, as a player in the game, you cannot do more than the trinkets that you own allow you to do. You are constrained. Now, what do? When the banker gets up and goes to the bathroom, you slip over and you grab a $500 bill, right? How many of you have done it? We all know.
Sliding houses, yeah.
But that's not issuing your own currency. That's theft, right?
Correct.
So what we do as federal leaders is they go up there with this same. We are going to balance the budget just like I did in my state as governor. I can show you how, and what happened was, and I don't have, if we were doing graphs, I could show you one of the graphs about how it's a mirror image, right? Just like I'm telling you, the national debt represents per penny the amount of money that's been put into the economy that has not yet been taxed back, right? So when you look at the private sector, the foreign sector, which is where we do our trades, and then the public sector. The public sector is a mirror image of the other two, right? Because that's all the money that's been put out there. Well, what happened was when the federal government was in surplus, that meant it was taking all the money back out of the game. The private sector went into debt. They went under.
The fucking thing that everybody says Clinton was so great for developing a surplus actually was fucking the rest of us over.
Yes, because he took all the money out of the game. So now what you guys are doing is you're playing with now let's say there's another player in the game that is given the authority to loan. That would be like the mechanism of a real bank, right? And what you're doing now, because the government, the real monopoly banker, took all the currency back, said, I'm taking all this back because I need to balance my books over here. Now you guys figure out how to play among yourselves. Well, some thug comes in and says, I'll give you some paper cash. It looks like this. And here, you can pay me some of this paper cash back at a higher, at an interest rate. And this will get you by, just like they tried telling the frickin' workers to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
Borrow.
They expanded the credit cards from farmers to everybody.
That's right. So that's what happened and I'll tell you, when we lived in that great prosperity and people are saying, yeah, but you won't see the effects of what their policies are until years after, right? Which is true because, they're there, they're gone. But the shit that they did is what follows through. But when you start understanding this and you actually start looking at the graphs, and I will share a PowerPoint, a Google Slides that I can give you a link to that has all these charts on it that I put together for our talk the other day.
We'll put it into the YouTube video.
Okay. And so you can see where the numbers lie, right? You can see that wages have stayed stagnant. You can see that the wealth and income gap between the 90% and the 10% has widened. Yeah. You can see that money is being at times. It's always because it spans like the whole 100 years or something. At times when we tried to balance the budget, we were followed with recession because we were pulling money out and people were going into debt. And when they go into debt, the recovery from recession is always trickle. It's never boom. Right. Unless you're giving all the bankers money, right? Yeah. Then it's like,
a one shot.
Here, take all of your bonuses and everything and straighten up the mess you made.
Filthy.
It is exactly filth. They should have an idea that would have balanced out those books and then helped lift up society in a way like if we're, termites living on a mound, we're taking care of each other, right? Yeah. Is that we would have paid off all those mortgages instead of just putting the money into the banks to balance their books. We would have paid the mortgages off and it would have created the same amount of financial equity into the system, but it would have given those people their homes, which would have created more financial equity by stimulating, because it would have taken away their payments and they would have been only paying taxes instead of monthly payments and all this other stuff.
God damn, Johnny Progress. I have to say, a guy like you and knowledge like this, are you running for office?
Well, that's up in the air right now. I don't know how effective I am right here in my place.
Does anyone else just feel like they got raped by the ghost of J.P. Morgan, or is it just...
Yeah.
And actually, Adam Smith still has his finger in my asshole.
So. Well, that's all the stuff that you're saying. it goes against what we were kind of taught in school, but it makes perfect sense when you talk. Like everything that you said, it makes absolute sense.
And now you're going to understand why all of these MMTers, they're embracing the term now, but why they're coming out of the woodwork.
They're so wild about it.
And why the ones who have been doing it for 20 years have been working for it behind the scenes and everything. It started with like 3 people talking about this is how this works, and nobody's talking about it. And then it started with then it moved into a blog, and then now we had a conference in New York with like 300 people, and the one before that was like 50 or something, or half that size or something. So it's growing, and now Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comes in and says, MMT needs to be part of the conversation. So now if you go on Stephanie Kelton, Pavlina's, Rohan Gray's, if you go on their Twitter feeds, they're slamming all these articles that are coming out in mainstream media, which I was going to mention. Everybody needs to be very weary of, okay, because there are Swiss cheese. These articles are Swiss cheese. They they talk about the tenets of MMT a little bit, but then they start throwing in these falsities and these misrepresentations. MMTs don't say this. They don't say that. We don't say that inflation is not a problem and that all you have to do is raise taxes, because there are many other mechanisms to control inflation.
Yeah, Forbes is another one. Forbes, you got to watch out for. That was, like I said, I read probably 30, 40 articles since 9 o'clock this morning, and all the negative ones are all coming out of the Wall Street sector. They don't want people to know this is how it works, because then they'll be like, well, wait a minute, we could have healthcare for everyone.
Now,
And
in discussing MMT, one of the main tenets of MMT is a federal job guarantee.
Yeah.
Okay. What Bill Mitchell, one of the founding fathers of MMT, says is that MMT must have an FJG, and an FJG cannot exist without MMT, a true FJG, right? Because the way an FJG works is you are paid directly from the federal government, just like you would a Social Security check or a disability check or any other, like your tax check or whatever, right? So it comes straight from the Fed, boom, from the Treasury, bam, you get your check for the hours you put in that week. Now, what kind of jobs are they? Well, they're jobs that are created on the local level from your local community, not your mayor, not your city council. They can take part, but it's community commissions of people like me and you who know, hey, we need to clean up a river. We need childcare. We need elder care. We need environmental restoration.
So to ask for money for these things, people would like asking for grant money?
Nope. That's where I'm drawing this line. I know there's people that say this is where the Levy Institute is the one who put out the real federal job guarantee, right? No block grants, no working with private industry. What this is you just think about, okay, if we had a building in our community, a facility, because the program doesn't pay for the facilities, right, or the materials. So if you wanted to help renovate old houses or old buildings for people to live in, you would have to supply the paint and that as a community. But you would pay for the labor through the job guarantee. And I mean, we're not going to get into the weeds about exactly how we're going to administer it.
Filing for this, okay.
But the idea is that it's decentralized to the local area, so you can't really cheat anything as long as you're building something for public purpose, not building, but doing something.
Well, and what I really like about that idea, and with what you're talking about with MMT, and the idea that MMT is basically the way things work, it's up to us to kind of understand how it works. The way with the federal jobs guarantee that I like too, that it really goes in line with something that there's actually a plutocrat that I follow, believe it or not. His name is Nick Hanauer. He's really interesting. He's a guy, he's a TED Talk that says, to my fellow plutocrats, the pitchforks are coming. And he kind of reverses the paradigm. Yeah, he reverses the paradigm. He's like, look, I'm not a job creator. He's like, I'm not going to create a fucking job, one more job than I need to, period. That's just the way it is.
Right.
I'm going to have a business. I want to make money. I'm going to create, I need 100 jobs to sell my goods, and I'm going to have 100 jobs open. And so effectively, when I put money in your pocket, and then you come around and you go and buy one of my goods or services, well, that puts a demand on that good or service. Enough demand creates a vacuum that creates a demand to sell that good or service. Enough of demand creates more jobs. So in effect, people are actually the job creators because you are the ones who demand to sell that good or service.
Exactamundo.
Yes. And so if you have a federal job guarantee where money is free flowing into the pockets of the consumers, into the pockets of the breeder class, which is what we are, working class, we're the breeder class, and we create the jobs by going and shopping on the economy. So stifling that from the economy stifles economic growth.
Now, expand on that from picturing a job guarantee. Now, I want you just to envision, we have a job guarantee. You can walk into your local employment office, say, I just lost my job. These jobs are a fair wage. We're starting to use a fair wage rather than living wage, because what does living mean? Fair wage,
surviving.
medical and paid leave, right? That's like the base plan. Now, there are some people that talk about different tiers. I'm not getting into that because that gets into the weeds and it gets into discussions about how you qualify people for the different tiers. But I say that the fair wage should be $20 an hour. By the time we get to there, we should be talking about $20 an hour right now instead of 15 anyway, because we're way past 15. So we might as well be talking about $20 an hour. So that's what that does, is that creates a floor now for all the rest of the businesses to live up to. Now, if you are Walmart and you're not paying, we'll say $15 an hour because that's our day, right? If you're not paying $15 an hour offering medical and paid leave, then who the hell would want to work for you in their right mind? Okay.
But now you're talking about putting the labor the people in the labor market in control a little bit more.
Leveraging labor again.
Right.
Because
It's like we don't even need a union.
Well, I'm not going to go that far.
Okay.
I might run for Congress, so I'm not going to say that. But here's what we want to do out of the job guarantee is we want to work, because most most unions are paying over a fair wage, right?
Yeah.
So we want to work with our local unions that are looking for workers, right? So this is a stepping stone for young people, or for people that don't have experience, or maybe they want new training to start getting into programs in the job guarantee in your local community. You can think of anything that you guys could want to do. If you got dilapidated buildings, again, there's going to be some investment on the local community's part for things like that. But things like childcare, community childcare, you could do that immediately. You could say, we're going to hire 50 people. Of course, you vet them the same way you do vetting childcare, and elder care people today. You don't just have some guy that got out of prison say, oh, you're just going to have prisoners watch my kid. No, you idiot. We're going to vet people the same exact way that we do it now, only we're going to shift the responsibility of production and profit, because these are for profit, and we're going to get away from for profit for these certain services, and then we also start rethinking labor in and of itself. Why should we even be worried about, or why shouldn't we be looking at compensating a homemaker for taking care of his or her child and food and clothing and all those things that they do throughout the day to take care of their child? Why do they have to go put their child in childcare so they can go to work to pay childcare?
Yeah.
That makes no
Especially
sense.
all the single parents you have out there now, people not looking for monogamous relationships but still want to have children. I mean, this kind of thing has to get covered, let alone the stay-at-home parent that doesn't get paid. Yeah.
Consider also, instead of just looking at the aspect of like paying somebody for childcare, what that does is it brings up the notion that we can rethink what it means to compensate people for their time. What is labor? Labor doesn't have to be digging a shovel. Okay, we can let machines do most of the hard labor while we oversee machines, and we innovate, making those machines even better.
Yeah.
We don't, so we can shift what labor means. It's not about digging ditches just to dig ditches, even though the argument can be made economically. Paying somebody to dig a ditch just to fill the ditch is more economically sound than letting them drain on the economy by being unemployed.
Right.
Good point.
It doesn't matter. And if they're willing to dig a ditch because they want the exercise, then let them.
Yeah.
Not everybody has to dig, but that's where we get into, again, we're not talking about just this is one kind of job. It has to be labor. What about rethinking? Look, there's administrative jobs. Immediately, you got to start staffing the commission of people. Pay those people to interview, to process, right? So you start employing people immediately who may have, computer skills, things like that. They can sit at a computer.
I'm sorry, I just had a flashback.
Yeah, and take assessments of people. What about surveys, research, science, and things like that? What does our community want? Paying 10 people to go out and survey the community on what they think we should have in our community, and then you can employ more people. I mean, it's never ending. And what you've done is you flipped the script on labor. Now, no more can an employer threaten you with your job and say, if you don't like it, screw you, you're fired. Now you're flipping the script and saying, listen, Bob, I don't like the way you're talking to me. It's not very polite. And I don't have to put up with this for another $3 or $4 an hour, whatever you're getting over the job guarantee. You say, it's not worth it. I'll take a break for a couple months and I'll go work in the job guarantee and do something for my community, which is usually always rewarding. You get done with the day and you feel good about yourself as well as getting paid. And then
do it.
And then there's also programs, because we encourage this, there's programs within the job guarantee that move people out. It's not a lifelong, like you're going to be working it. It's meant to be a cushion so that we no longer have involuntary unemployment as a buffer stock. The fact that we have 16 million people out of work in our economy, and that's considered full employment.
That is so messed up.
I just have one question. Johnny, is this... do you want Star Trek? Because that's how you get to the utopia Star Trek, where you have people that are getting paid by everyone else to do a public service and taking it out of the private sector. You know what I mean? Like you said, daycare.
Well, you're not necessarily taking it, I mean, here's the thing with the private sector. Here's what we want to do with this. We don't want to keep fostering bottom-up compensation.
No.
We want to foster socialism. Socialism is not a governmental involvement. You guys know that, right? Socialism is enterprise. It is the business. It is worker-owned, democratized business. Yeah. That is what real socialism is. When Karl Marx talks about socialism, he doesn't talk about government involvement or government planning or any of that. Now, we can take it a step further and we can foster socialist ideas and tenets through our government, like rewarding a business that is more equitable by, like, having worker-owned models where there's this Richard D. Wolff talks about Mondragon in Spain, which is a worker-owned deal. It started with like 6 people, now it's
the most
1,000. And if we as a society say, listen, we no longer accept the Walmart model, these other models where it's top down, where you have an executive making all these money. So what we're going to do is we're going to start giving incentives, tax breaks, loans, no interest loan.
The same way we encourage capitalism now, we can encourage this other style.
We can start getting people out of the job guarantee who have skill sets. Like me, for instance, I know how to build homes. I know how to build websites. I could do a few different things, right? I could meet up with somebody in there who knows how to build things, and they say, hey, man, let's start our own business together. But instead of it being a small private business where it's just 2 people struggling gig by gig, you help foster a company that is, again, it's a small team of people working together, but they're being equitable. In that Mondragon, the highest paid executive pay is only 8.5 times more than the lowest paid worker. 8.5.
And it's by design. They chose that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So,
we're sitting here screaming
another
over
thing
trying to get
Richard
50.
Wolff talks about that I really like. One thing I really like that Richard Wolff talks about that I wasn't even aware of until, I don't know, about 6 or 7 months ago was there's the unemployment model in Italy, as I understand. They will say, well, look, you have X amount that we will give you as far as your unemployment. We will give you all of it up front right now if you spend half of it in some sort of entrepreneurial capacity and start up a new business. And like, how is that not working within like the American model of entrepreneurship? And so I like that idea. I don't know if that's necessarily the way to implement it here, but it's such a great, it's a really interesting idea to play with here in the land of the brave.
Yeah, it is interesting, and it's nothing that I would crap on. But here's a problem with that. And for somebody who actually worked as a coach for many years and still consider myself as a business coach, a consultant, is not everybody can be an entrepreneur.
Right.
And this is why I got pissed off, and I was just talking to our friend Lana Dell about this guy that I still follow on Facebook, one of the first guys that tried selling this push-button, get rich quick shit, and lifting yourself up by your bootstraps, and it's all just dependent on how much work you put in, buddy. That's all it is. No,
blame
bullshit.
yourself. Yeah, right.
Because he lied to people. He didn't tell people he had $10,000 to buy into another program as a partner with these other people, and they had a list of people, and he was, a radio host, and he had connections and all this other shit that comes into play when you're an entrepreneur. And there was just a study that came out. They said most successful entrepreneurs are white middle class, or not white middle class, but white wealthy people. Why? Because that's where, in our country, that's where the wealth has gone since the white people got here, right?
And they have the easiest mobility for influence.
Absolutely. I can afford to take a risk.
Right.
So when you have that starting point, like Trump getting, that's why we get so pissed off, because people say, oh, he's successful, he's this. No, you asshole. He was given all of this. He was this was all handed to him. And then when you have all that capital, you have so much. I mean, it's like you're given $20,000 to start playing Monopoly over everybody else. you know, and when you can buy every single property you land on, then you're going to have more advantage than the people who can't. And that's just the way it goes.
I saw a great meme the other day, and it said, you don't earn $1 billion, you take $1 billion.
Yeah,
you know,
well,
and all the billionaires will know. Yeah,
that's Stephanie Kelton. So go follow her on Twitter.
Yeah,
because that's where you're going to see some of this, and there's going to be articles, and there'll be other things that, you know, I mean, they're the ones that are leading. I regurgitate, I dissemble what they talk about, and try to, you know, put it in more layman's terms, try to make these analogies that people can associate with. But I'm sticking to what they're saying, because when I look at what they're saying, it all makes sense to me. It always made sense to me, and I just didn't have the people putting the nuts and bolts together for me.
Right, we didn't have the vocabulary for it.
Yeah, I always knew that the dollar was just an arbitrary representation. I was telling my kid this 2 years ago when we were helping some farmers. We had our time cards, and I was so pissed off because we had no real money, and I was so sick of money, because money, all it is, and I was holding up our time cards. I said, money is an arbitrary representation of value. These time cards are just as value as the money he's going to turn around and give me for them. They represent the time that we put in to earn that money.
Yeah.
The dollar it's the production that we create that is important. None of the dollars have any value, any real value, if there are no humans to produce, to create a value for that money.
So, Johnny, getting back to the federal jobs guarantee,
yes,
and I know it's definitely linked, I think, to educating people on MMT as far as understanding how it would all occur. You had mentioned off the air that it was much like the ERA, where you have to get it. Were you trying to say that it needs to get ratified by all the states, like a constitutional convention or something, for that to be implemented?
No. What I was saying is, I view this Fight for FJG, the organization that I founded, as kind of like that same type of push as we build out, right? So each state, each group should be, you know, depending on your state and your involvement, the organization is kind of like our revolution, in that we're going to work with candidates. It's a C4. At least we're not full blown yet. So this is kind of the vision. I'm open to whatever the board members want, because I'm not running the show.
Right.
But the idea is to start educating people on the local level, right? And then we're going to have a resolution that's going to present the job guarantee, maybe the Green New Deal, maybe it's just the job guarantee. It's going to present that to local leaders, state and local leaders, and say, here's what we have. This is why you want it. So the ERA, the example I was using was only that we can focus in it on our state level and our local level and get them to adopt it and then demand it, right? To say, hey, we want this federal job guarantee because we want to employ all the unemployed people in our state. We want to employ all the unemployed people in our city. We want this, and they know it's not on their dime, because we've expressed to them MMT, how the federal government pays for it. You're not going to have to raise taxes. As a matter of fact, you're creating all this new tax revenue now for your local and state areas to put more money into schools, into healthcare, into whatever things that you may need
just
money
people
for.
Taking control of allocation.
Right.
Yeah. I definitely, I would love to see something like that get completely put together. And I have to say that we have like 7.5 minutes here before our next break. I was curious if Mr. Haney or Mr. Cameron had any more questions for Mr. Akzam.
Well, I mean, my biggest thing is, like you said, it's education. People have to understand. The people that run our economy are not, magical, mystical beasts that just, sprinkle something in a black cauldron and then poof, now we've got money for, war, or we've got money for more tax breaks, or we've got, all this funding for everything else. People need to realize that if they can find the funding, like you said, for, the war budget, and that same amount of money could have just as easily have gone and been created for, like you said, federal jobs, or, Medicare, or free tuition, or everything else. And
that's everything else.
Every argument they have that we can't afford it is fucking bullshit.
No, but then they pull out the fear gun, right? The fear gun of, oh, your taxes will go up. Oh, inflation will happen. Oh,
as a matter of fact, we have proven And the GOP and Koch brothers helped us prove that Medicare for All is less costly. Okay, and you notice how the terminology I try to use, right? It's less costly, meaning that it costs less of those dollars when you're spending them out, right? Not that it's so anyway, it's less costly, which means we would, not that we would have to because we're looking at raising taxes because they've been lowered, but if we would technically have to lower taxes because it saves money.
Yeah. Well, but like you said, it's all about resources, and I think that's the other thing is they like to throw out that resource fear as well. Like you use the example for gas and concrete. I mean, building materials. But on the other hand of that is that I think would encourage innovation. Like the big one right now is the federal farm bill with hemp. Well, you can make concrete out of hemp. Yeah.
Why are we still making stick houses anyway?
Right.
They should be making houses that look, we've proven, we see there's videos, the dome housing is more stable for wind areas. You can build dome housing in areas also out of concrete where they don't need. The thing about dome housing, the reason as a former builder I love dome housing is because it needs no internal support structure. Right, it's already standing up. The dome supports it, so you can just partition your home any way you want inside that dome, and it's now
without the restriction of support beams and shit in the middle of the home. Yeah, exactly. I've seen that.
And so in California, where you have all these fires, they've got home materials, concrete. You could build a dome house where all of your stuff is going to be safe. You evacuate, you come back. And, your yard is burned up and things like that, but the stuff in your buildings is safe because it just burned right past it. There's videos showing this, not in California, but in other places where this has happened. And what do? We experience disaster and we turn around and rebuild with the same building materials and same concept in mind. Why? Because those building companies,
they
suppliers,
have a hold on.
They run the show. I'm not talking about the guy, the local contractor. I'm talking about the suppliers of the lumber and the big
USG
contractors
and all those giant companies.
The ones that are going to get called in to do the big work. They don't want to fix, just like the reason your car doesn't run forever and your phone doesn't last forever and all this other shit, because it's consumption based. When we start getting away from a consumption base, what drives the consumption-based economy? Profits, right?
But that's profits for the few and not for the many. Right. That's the big thing that gets me.
Increasing profits at all costs.
Ever increasing. It's not about sustainability and sustaining the needs of the society. It's about always increasing profit in order to get more and more and more, because we have to grow and grow. We can't just take care of the people that we have. No, that's outlandish. We have to look. There was just an article where I know you guys saw it. Amazon was trashing and throwing away a bunch of products in a warehouse.
Yeah.
Yes.
You saw that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I could use
all that consumption went to waste, and instead of giving it to people, they destroyed it because they don't have the trade trinkets. They don't deserve it. You don't have enough trade trinkets to buy this. You don't deserve to have it.
Good old trade trinkets.
Well, all high-end clothing does that as well.
Yes.
This is another thing that Richard Wolff talks about. Louis Vuitton, and so they'll just burn shit just so it doesn't go to the discount stores because they're selling it an image as well. Right. They'd rather it burn and actually the economy in the same way you were talking about, like housing for the banks. Whoa, you talk a lot, dude. Hold on, let's finish points. And real quick, and the same thing with your with the banks. You mentioned about housing and how the banks easily could have actually paid for people's mortgages and their housing. We now have in a system, I think it was the St. Louis Fed, that said that we have now an 11-to-1 bank-owned empty house per homeless person. So for every one homeless person, there's 11 empty houses owned by the bank, which is fucking insane.
It is insane, especially when again, back to the termite mentality, right? Why? I mean, insects have better social skills than we do. They take care of each other. They take care of the collective.
Well, but
we don't.
No, but there's a reason why. It's because they want to get you coming and going, right? That's the whole vampire economy in a nutshell. Is they want to keep you dependent on these shit jobs that pay barely a livable wage, but they know you're not going to be able to afford the healthy food, so then you're going to get sick. So now they're going to get you with you don't have insurance, so you're going to go to the hospital. But if you had insurance, the saving would only be $1.99, but now since you don't, it's $19.99.
You starting to feel like cattle yet?
Oh yeah, definitely feel like cattle. But I mean, that's the thing is it goes to that old adage: if you ever get anything for free, if it doesn't have ads on it, then you're the product.
And with that, we're going to have to go ahead and cut away again. We might have a little bit more after this break, and we might not. I don't know. It's a mystery. We'll see. Josh Cameron, if you'd like to say bye to the people, I know you have to get away so you can go continue to save the world.
Yes, I've actually got to play dad so I can continue to save the world, because I have a certain allotment of time that I need to spend with the kid. So plus I need to fix my furnace. But yeah, hey, thanks guys. I've really enjoyed the conversation. You are quite a wealth of knowledge there, Mr. Akzam. I actually gave a shout out to you when I was talking to Savage Joy, and apparently the real progressives are down with the Akzam, as it were.
Oh, well, thank you.
And I used to think that the people pitching MMT were kind of cultish, because the way it was coming across to me sounded like they had just come up with this shit, and it was counter to everything I ever knew. And the way they pushed it was like somebody trying to push a new god on me, and I could not stand it. And so I intrinsically just ignored them. And I think that's what a lot of people do whenever they hear about this.
And you know what's interesting about that? At the conference this last time, Bill Mitchell, who he's an Australian guy, so he speaks with, an Australian accent, and, that's always becoming, but
always lovely. Yeah.
He's such a nice guy though too, right? And he even talked about, we talked about this cultism and how we shouldn't even be using the term MMT. Now, the reason it's back is because of AOC, right?
Yeah.
And we're not shying away from it, because now the mainstream is using it. Now we have to justify and educate people on the holes that they're leaving out. But
keep them from defining it, right.
Right. But just prior to AOC and the outbreak, we were discussing how MMT, using the term, is not as important as discussing the principles.
Yeah.
Discussing what we can do with them, and discussing that, federal taxes actually don't fund, federal programs. They don't, they aren't revenue. Oh, what? What do you mean? Yes, of course they are. And then, having that discussion without saying, well, MMT tells us that, because it's not about this trying to build MMT as some kind of movement, because all MMT is a description of the understanding of how the mechanisms work. And these are people.
It's unfortunate that people equate the word theory to not necessarily true.
Right. Like what the way Stephanie Kelton says is it's a theory like gravity's a theory.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And we're all operating understanding gravity, even though we all accept the fact that maybe there's something else out there in the world. But for now, this works, and that's what we have. Yeah.
And so and theory, as in the means of, like scientific theory, proves that this is, it's not like, oh, this is some kind of theory we're coming up with. And that is true, because I even early on said, I'm going to start calling MMT modern monetary truth. That's got to catch on. We've got to make that catch on, because theory is confusing everybody. But of course I lost that race.
That was a pretty good idea though.
Yeah. So we've actually been talking about not really getting so MMT this, MMT that, MMT this, but kind of mixing it up and just talking about things. And there are some people in the movement, like a lot of the real progressives crowd, that are feverish about teaching people MMT. Now, here's what I say to that. I understand that some people see that kind of cultish and how it can be hurting things in some respect, but there are different levels to the exposure, right? So what some people gravitate toward and what other people's gravitate toward are different. I understand that we don't want to see kind of things in a negative light. So that's why we have these discussions.
Right.
Hopefully people will calm down on that end and not get so, oh, you're just a fucking idiot. You need to learn MMT, right?
I actually would get messages like that sometimes. I can't name who. I don't remember. They definitely had the logo though, which was a problem because that's
what really starts. Well, then when we see MMT mentioned in an article, we have this negative connotation about it automatically, and we want to look at those holes.
It's like a natural bigotry. Yeah.
Right. We want to say, oh, yeah, see, I was right. This columnist agrees with me. This is all just a bunch of bullshit, and I was right in my thinking. Right?
Yeah, and
so I agree with you.
I really think MMT and even explaining the concept of the federal jobs guarantee would be most beneficial to push to the people who are usually on the right and are usually like closer to the Tea Party level of on the right, like Trump folks, those supporters, because they seem to argue that, we need to lower taxes so that it will shrink government. And if we don't tax everybody, then government will get smaller because it won't have enough money to fund programs like all these entitlements that everyone doesn't deserve. Right. And it's like, everything you just said, if you understand the MMT theory, the MM theory, I don't want to be like ATM machine, that's a dirtier term. Everything you just said was bullshit. That's all crap. Like, whatever you think that is true, it's not. It can't be.
Right.
In fact, quite the opposite occurs.
Well, honestly, maybe you guys need to take the mall map theory or not mall map principle to this and say, here's where we are. This is how this shit is working. This is how it's supposed to work. And then just show two separate destinations. This is where we should be, but this is where we are.
That's I like that analogy. And you know what? That's what's happening right now. Now that AOC has busted it out in the mainstream, you see these mainstream economic activists, whether they're the lawyers, most of them are either law professors, so they deal with policy and things like that, or economists.
Or Ben Stein. I guess
we have a few archaeologists and sociologists mixed in the crowd as well. But they're starting to step up now that the terminology and the idea has been getting the attention. They're stepping up and saying that. They're saying, look, Alan Greenspan sat right there and told Paul Ryan that Social Security cannot go insolvent.
Yeah.
He sat there and told him, he said, there's nothing stopping the U.S. government from printing as much money as it wants and spending it on whatever it wants. The real problem is, are we capable of putting a system together that can put those real resources to work for what the money is needed for? So what he was saying in that respect when it came to Social Security was, if we're paying people money that they can go out and spend on real resources, but there isn't the production of those real resources available, then that's going to cause a problem, basically saying inflation, right?
Yeah.
He's right. That's why a UBI is not a good idea, because we're not putting people to work in productive capacity.
That's what my post was about. It was a UBI post. And you countered it, and I said, okay, fair enough. And then I started getting more countered, and it wasn't meeting. I am as fragile as the next person. It wasn't meeting my expectations of results, and I got frazzled and cursed and needed my post. But there's got to be a way to approach this that doesn't rattle everybody, right?
Right. I was trying because we're friends and. Because I know that you're not really, you didn't really know all this because you'd been asking questions before.
I had no idea.
I was taking into account that kind of cultist thinking that's been out there and trying to say, actually this would probably be a better and you actually, I remember kind of vaguely, and you responded that, so whatever. And then, whatever social media world, it got dropped. But it turns out you started getting attacked by people who were, oh no, fucking UBI is a stupid idea. You don't understand what you're talking about.
That's what it was. And I was like, I can't take this.
And what I found is, look, there is a lot to be said for what people want out of the UBI. It's kind of an idea of a resource-based economy we're many, many decades away from something like that because we need to get our stuff straight, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we can't shoot for something like that, but I
we need steps in between is what you guys are coming out.
We do. And also, job guarantee proponents do support a BI. You take the U off of it. We support a basic income that is above what you see in Social Security. So people who refuse to work, who can't work, who don't fit into the workforce program for whatever reason, are entitled to a basic amount of living on top of whatever social nets that we have, like Medicare and things like that. And now, we can encourage people who are lazy to work, okay? And we could find ways to encourage them to be productive in the community. If we absolutely can't, then we don't just let them sit out and starve. That isn't how we deal with people, right? So,
but this is like conversation we had on our last podcast. I mean, when we started talking about socialism and everything else, the government is more than willing to take care of its citizens in the form of you're a prisoner, because then you're guaranteed housing, shelter, clothing, food, right? But you don't have your freedom, and the happy medium has to be what you guys are both talking about. Like, I spent 2 hours looking at MMT. I'm really starting to get a good grasp on it, and it makes sense. And I can see how the UBI would be as beneficial as if we did, or if the government operated like it should. But the biggest problem is
giving everybody, the reason the UBI with the universal part is not acceptable at this point is because all you're doing is adding to the wealth and income inequality. Because you can't see my hands, but
You're
I have
not shifting anything.
I have one hand lower than the other, and I'm moving them both up at the same time. So,
and that's that dumbass rising tide regional shift nonsense. Right.
What we want to focus on are the people in need, because your neighbor down the street who makes $100,000 doesn't need another $12,000 added to his annual income, because all he's going to do is put it in the bank, put it in retirement, put it in some kind of investment. It's not going to get circulated into the economy. It's not going to produce anything.
No, it's just hoarded wealth that does nothing for the economy. Which
I believe is also why a flat tax makes no fucking sense.
Well, and look, I had to come around to that. I didn't understand what until I understood what taxes were for, especially on the federal level, right? Yeah. I didn't understand that fairness, that it was to get to control wealth and income inequality, right? And so I thought, yeah, sure, sounds fair. 10% for everybody, 15%, then everybody pays. But it doesn't address wealth and income inequality, because if you are born into wealth, like say Trump was, then what difference does it make to you if you're paying, the same amount as somebody else? You're set. You got it, man.
I like making an analogy with food on this one. Let's say that all a human being needs every day is one grilled cheese sandwich, and one guy has 10 million grilled cheese sandwiches, and the other guy has one grilled cheese sandwich, and the government wants to tax both of those people 15%. The guy with 1 million grilled cheese sandwiches is still going to eat today. The guy with only one of them is now going to be a little bit malnourished.
Exactly. That's
what's fucked up.
The thinking comes from, and where we start talking about not equality, but equity.
Right.
There's a big difference. There's a meme that I shared where these guys are watching a baseball game and they're standing on boxes, and they're all
I've seen that one. I like that one.
And they've put different captions to it, but the one that I shared was the difference between equity and equality. So equality is they're all standing on one box, and the tall guy gets to see, the medium guy gets to see, and the short guy doesn't.
Yeah.
Equity, the tall guy doesn't get a box because he's tall enough to see over the fence. The middle guy gets to stand on one box, which allows him to see over the fence, and the little guy gets 2 boxes. So all 3 boxes are shared equitably among the needs of those individuals.
Beautiful.
Not equally, right? So, and that really kind of paints that picture. And people say, well, that's not fair. Well, wait a minute. Why isn't it fair? He can't help the fact he was born the way he was born. You can't help where you were born, what family you were born into. That's where we also start talking about ideas like baby bonds.
Yep.
Where when you're 18, you have an automatic nest egg.
Yeah, Gerber actually kind of has that sort of thing going on with their private funding, of course, but
this is a program that's being pushed and advocated by Derek Hamilton.
Okay.
He's really, academic professor over in Denison, and black rights activist, and all that stuff, talks about reparations. But the idea of the baby bond comes through that deal that people are born into poverty.
Yeah.
You have no leg to stand up. How do you pick yourself up by bootstraps? You don't have boots.
Well, that's the biggest misconception, and that's one that realistically, like when we do the podcast, I'm kind of the blue collar guy. I'm not as deep into politics as everyone else, but I kind of give that perspective that this is how most people are. We don't got time to sit here and do all this research and everything else, and then you get fatigued. You get to the point where you don't want to, like you guys were talking about the MMT and then the cult angle is it's one more thing. Like, it gets tiring after a while, but that's what
every year.
Right, but that's what they count on. That's what they want. You've got an entire elite portion of the population who is at that greater advantage just because they happen to be the sperm that was born to a JP Morgan or a Rothschild or whoever.
Yeah.
So
or even the family that makes $250,000 a year.
Right.
Okay.
But then you've got
the 0.01%.
Right.
That group of people that are born into enough privilege that economics, that finances,
the
not
cul-de-sac middle class.
Right.
Yeah.
So then they are encouraged to then seek out, their power base somewhere else because they've already got the power base on the financial front. So they go into politics, and then of course their perspective is not going to be anywhere near what someone else's perspective, say mine, is. I wasn't born into a rich family. I've worked since I was 16.
Right. And most of your thought is towards getting money so that you can
exactly.
survive.
So they don't have that struggle. So then they can go and I want to be a politician and I want to go and be a policymaker. But their policy angle and everything else is, and it is human nature, is to make their wants and needs more prominent than what society should be.
Right. It's the out of touchness. It's
correct.
It's Wilbur Ross.
Yeah. It's Pelosi. Exactly. It's all these old, Methuselah types that have been in politics for 9 million years when they're writing policy that is not going to affect them in any way, shape, or form, just because unless they do a Dick Cheney and get a third heart transplant, they ain't going to be alive long enough to see what their policies will reap. Same thing with Trump. Later. Same thing with Pelosi. Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
and AOC is at least young enough that anything that she does, she's in the junior phases right now, and hopefully she doesn't get caught up and I don't know. I'm looking at politics as Vegas. It's a dirty fucking prostitute.
But I will tell you something about AOC that I will make clear to people, and this is, of course, just coming from me, but why I have complete faith in her at this point is because I know the circle of people that she runs with on a daily basis, and I actually communicate with a few of them on a daily basis as well. And I know I watched her very closely after she got the nomination, and I snapped on a couple things that she misstepped about affordable and accessible and things like that, and said, I don't want to see her backpedaling, trying to go to the center to get elected, where she won this nomination on these policies and what she was standing for.
Yeah, and Josh got real mad at me for implying that a little bit, but
but she did, and then she didn't, right? So she said something, and then that was like it, and then she started getting right back on course. And since she got into office, she's become a celebrity because of
darling.
It's not because like she did anything in particular to do it, but what she is doing is she's sticking to what, because I was pissed that she wasn't saying the MMT stuff, and she knows it. I know her circle. I know the people that she runs with. And so when she was kind of dancing around, well, we could raise taxes and this and that, I was getting a little excited about that, because I was like, listen, you know the truth. We've been waiting for this. It's your opportunity to stand up and speak the damn truth. You don't need 20 of you up there to start doing it.
But now, see, let me interject. See, that is the problem with me and my type, is the simple fact is we know and we accept the used car dealership mentality when it comes to politicians. They promise you everything to get to that point, and then once they get to that level, then suddenly they turn their back, and then they start voting where the money is, or they start voting how lobbyists want them to vote so they can get that money. And that is the biggest disillusion that I have with, I mean, I spent 15 years in Canada, and now that I'm back in the States, nothing's fucking changed. It's actually, they don't even bother to hide it anymore.
No,
you know what
it's
sold
worse.
her for me, though? You know what sold her for me is her recent vote. Her recent vote against the thing that every Democrat voted for the wall funding, because it was going to end the shutdown, but it also gave more money to ICE, and she and her constituents don't want that to happen, is what she said. And so she voted no, against the will of every single person in her party. And anyone who is willing to do that, so far, you're 100% in my book.
Right.
But we all know the game. The game states that if you don't play well with the others that are in power, you won't be allowed to play the game anymore. They'll make it to where,
well, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
That not with her. See, now with me, if I were there, probably. Right, but not with her, because she has the power of celebrity that the media has created for her. So now and plus either she or her team or whatever it is are freaking awesome with their comebacks on social media.
Yes.
Yeah.
When they attack her, she doesn't get snide. She has some of the most pristine comebacks that answer to whatever attacks that they have. So she's setting an example. Whereas, because that's why she got the positions in the House Finance Committee and stuff like that, because her celebrity was able for her to demand that. Now, others that made it through that aren't quite as popular, they're gonna have to stick close to that, is what I'm thinking. See, this is my thing. I don't care. I was doing shit that I was supporting shit long before she was even out of diapers. Okay. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that if I were elected, I wouldn't be up there saying, where do we go next, OC? Where are we going?
Right.
I'm headed with you. I got this, I'll ride those coattails of celebrity as long as it's leading us to the right direction of getting the things done for the people, and we're not misleading people and stuff like that. It doesn't always mean that we're going to stand up against every Democrat or every establishment decision. We might join in with them. We might make concessions, because behind the scenes, you don't know what they're talking about. You don't know that she's saying, okay, listen, I'll vote this vote, but I want this, and this. And she's getting them, because it's not out in the news. It's not being talked about. Maybe she doesn't tweet about it. But those kind of deals are being done. And we're going to have to trust that she's making calculated decisions, her and others that are, there with her. She's not alone. I try to remind people of that. There's a group of them that are standing together on certain things.
Standing on the shoulders of some greatness in the Bernie.
Now, this is my personal opinion, and that's the problem that I have. It's like you said, you don't know what deals are being made in the background, and to me, that is what is the biggest problem with our current government, is you don't know. Yeah, there is no trust. You are a public servant. We put you in office. We voted for you. You're there on our dime. You're to do what we want, not necessarily, but that's the other side of that mentality, is now I'm a billionaire and I'm going to pay someone to go and lobby you to get my will done.
And you're absolutely right. Now, here's kind of where I'm going with that, is because I agree with you, is when I talk about things being talked about, kind of behind the scenes, is things like if you worked on a campaign, for instance, there were things in our campaign. I tried to be the most transparent I could in our last campaign, but there are things within your circle that you don't talk about in public because it's part of your strategy. It's part of a deeper understanding of where you're headed. Like, say, for instance, I don't want my competition to know the precinct strategy that I have, because I don't want them to use it.
Right.
It'll eventually get out.
Oh, now be careful, Johnny. You're sounding a little bit like Trump, right?
Well, no, but the
but
thing
he had a point, is what I'm saying.
Is that at least, and in this stage, I don't want to share that information, because now I will share that information with other people, like a lot of allies, right? Other candidates that are running in office, but I don't want my opposition to get a hold of that and say, hey, that's a pretty damn good idea. We should do what Johnny's doing and beat him, right? So there are a certain few things I kind of see a little leeway in, that you don't just throw everything out into the public eye and everything out, because, you know, you want to be strategic. Because we are fighting a war against other assholes. It's not just trying to serve the people right now, because part of serving the people is getting rid of the hate, the obstruction, and everything that's keeping those people down that they don't even know about.
You know, and what you're describing there is a pretty good argument. I'm not saying it proves anything, but it is a good argument against those who would say that Bernie Sanders was a usurper sheepdogger all along, and that he had never had plans. I mean, maybe he didn't expect to win, but he definitely wasn't. I don't believe that he was working for a Hillary win in the first place from the beginning.
Fuck, no, I don't believe that.
I'm not sure of that. But
no, he was surprised.
Once he was robbed, of course he was surprised. And once he was robbed, I mean, everybody saw him crying. I don't think that crying was because he felt like he did the wrong thing. I think that crying is because the people who he loved.
He was fucking crushed, man.
Yeah. And furthermore, his game that he's playing all up until now, or whenever he does announce, was the fact that he recognized that things have to be a certain way for him to be able to continue to try to get.
Hey, look, we can't stand
in his shoes. Yeah.
You know?
So, okay, but again, I'm going to interject on this one point.
Please.
If we all know that, then there is no changing anything, because the game will never change.
Well, no, I think what he's saying is we don't all know. First of all, not everybody knows what we admit is that Bernie, the reason he shifted over, supported Hillary, and all this other stuff is because of the pressures in his particular role that he has. And we can't put any, oh, you should have done this. Well, what's he still been doing? He's still been standing up for the people.
His message has not changed.
He has still been going around having town halls, debating people. I mean, come on. He's been doing what we want all of the 100 of them to do, but don't do. So he hasn't been holding any grudges. He hasn't been blaming anybody. He hasn't been doing any of that crap. He's just been working for the people. So, when we look at, the issue of him getting behind Hillary and everything, I mean, that was only
I have to call that strategy, and I just wish that he was, I don't know, in the moment I wanted him to be more virtuous, but to be virtuous is to have no strategy, because you're going by a different style.
Here's the reality about the whole Dem exit and green thing and everything else, because it wouldn't have happened, and we know that, because we look at 2018, they had 2 years to put together coalitions and build up and go against the establishment. And in Minnesota, in and of itself, I looked at the vote tallies. And even not just the Green Party, but we have the Legalized Party and We Party or something like that. And I only voted for one Democrat, okay? I don't have any problem telling people that. And it was a state legislator who was running for office, and she was progressive, and, I supported her. The rest of them, I kept my conscience clean. I knew my votes didn't count, and I just, marked off where I wanted to mark off. None of those third-party contenders combined came up to a spoiler effect for any candidates in any race. And this is where my final trajectory has gone with people and the whole online gaslighting over the establishment and the party and the duopoly and all this other crap is, listen, I'm sick of hearing it, because the third party insurgency never happened. Dem exit was a break apart. What should have happened was exactly what I told people in the beginning, is that, after the election, after Trump won, is there should have been an insurgence of Dem enter. And we should have went in and taken over the infrastructure. That infrastructure of both parties belongs to anybody who wants to go in and sit down and take it. We allow them, just like we allow our government to be the people that are in it. We allow the people to sit in those seats and make those decisions and to close off democracy. And it's like, I liken it to abandoning the castle to all the kingsmen and all the knights, So
absolutely. Or you could even imagine it like, the gobstoppers from Wonka, the candy, and like every time you suck on it, another layer goes away, and there's another layer behind that, and another one behind that, and another one behind that, and they're all different. They're all different flavors, and it seems like what's happened is like somebody out there, who knows what transpired, but a hole was poked all the way through to the center, and we could see the corruption going on in the middle, and all we want to do is fix that corruption. So we say we got to elect leaders that are going to do this for us. But then we back up and we say, but wait a minute, it's only the federal level that we have to worry about that, because at the state level, they're not as corrupt. And then we back up a little more and we say, well, wait a minute, the party itself is screwed up. Look at this lawsuit. All of a sudden, they're telling us they could just pick whatever they want and our votes don't matter. Well, we got to fix that. But wait a minute, the election has no integrity. We got to fucking fix election integrity before we can even start to worry about infiltrating and breaking up the primaries and making them more legal. And so at the end of the day, we have all been presented with all of the problems, and none of us are coming together on the one that could then start like a domino effect to fix the rest of it. Like we can't fix the middle before we get the outside shell done.
I agree. That's an awesome analogy. And you know what I look at it is that we're sitting here and we're trying to tell people that we're going to take over our government and change our government, but we can't even take over our local party units.
Yeah, who's going to take over Portland, Maine first?
You know, I mean, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can't even get enough people around your local area to go sit in your local Dem, I mean, look, there's less than a dozen people in my local Dem unit. You're trying to tell me that out of 100,000 person population, there's only 20 people, tops, a dozen, maybe, that sit in the unit, that we don't have enough progressive power in the community, when there's all these people standing on the outside saying, I don't like to be involved in politics, I don't like party politics, or I don't like whatever their excuse is for not being inside the party and helping make the decisions that affect the election process, right? Like in Minnesota, we have this delegate process that is basically like a mini electoral college. It's not democratic. Now, fortunately, the state has an optional public primary. However, if you don't win the delegates, it's pretty hard to have that support behind you unless you've got some kind of money and stuff like that to win the public primary. However, by the time we get to the public primary, if there's more than two candidates, we're still faced with a plurality because we don't have a voting method in place that guarantees a majority like ranked choice voting, or what I've seen so far better is star voting. It takes the combination of approval voting and ranked choice voting, and it's more accurate from the models that they've run. But nonetheless, even a ranked choice voting would give us a majority turnout that is better than what we have. And we don't accept, we accept that, like our governor in Minnesota was elected in the primary by a plurality. So there wasn't a majority of the Democratic field that voted for him. Just the two other progressives split the vote.
Folks, we came back for just a couple more minutes. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Mr. Akzam, Johnny Progress, for coming on and educating us. I think you have personally converted 3 people into your cult. So
definitely. And the good thing is it was either that or I'm pretty close to Florida, so it's either this cult or I become a Scientologist. But
oh well, I'm glad I could save you from that.
The wife's already threatened me with divorce because I did a deep dive on Scientology for the last 3 weeks.
Whoa, you got some feetin' in your feetin', huh?
Oh, that's the next podcast we're doing to it. I don't know.
Oh, Christ.
You have watched the South Park episode on that, right?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Making sure.
But I mean, overall, like I told Chris, is I now know more about MMT than I woke up with the desire to learn, which is not a negative thing. I'm just saying now it's definitely one of those things I'm going to start really paying attention to.
Yeah, well, and again, the primary thing to remember as we look at this like cultist, activity is that the people who are excited about it and that are coming off that way are generally newer. And when they get this realization, they want every frickin' buddy to know it because it's the answer, right? It's oh my God.
Think back to the moment you woke up and realized the government's not on your side.
Right.
Or the people in the government aren't on your side.
When we had the woke moment about the establishment, how they did Bernie, or, whatever point that you got woke at. Well, this is like an economic awakening. Yeah. And so when people realize it, and it clicks because it's like a kick in the head. You're like, holy crap, are you kidding me? It was this simple?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Honestly, I would equate it more to Soylent Green. It's people. You know what I mean? It's that realization is that simple. It's that easy.
And so what happens is the people who are like, like I can tell you are, right? Like you're going to be one of those people that's once you start grabbing a hold of more of the concepts of it and everything, you're going to start developing your own analogies and then being able to share that. Because we tell people, you know, I use the term, I learn MMT, then teach MMT. I use hashtags together because we want our friends and neighbors and our city council members and our, you know, again, all those local and state officials to understand what we understand about it, because there's all these great things we can do now. The fact that the Republicans have been practicing MMT for this entire time, right? Because they do. That's what they do. They spend, and then when it turns around, they say, "Oh, we have to cut the deficit," right? So after they spend, then they want to start cutting things because they're evil. They start cutting things as an excuse to cut down on the debt, even though most of them know better. Because and again, it's evil, right?
That's the worst.
Evil.
If you're in my face and you say I am evil, I'm going to kill you, that's one level. But if you're in my face and say I love you and you should do everything for me because I'm going to save you, and then you kill me, that's extra evil in my book.
Yes,
I'm not saying Democrats are worse than Republicans, but in that respect, that's why they have a little less respect. Because
that's exactly
if you're going to rob me, tell me to my face. That way I know to not vote for your ass. But if you're going to lie to me about that shit, fuck you. You know?
Yeah, but see, with me, I would more equate it to 3-card Monty. It's 3-card Monty, pure and simple. I mean, they know where the queen is. You know what I mean? Right. But they can change how they manipulate the game, even once you realize they're manipulating the game. So it's 3-card Monty, and the only way to win at 3-card Monty is not to play.
Oh, dude, I had a guy jack me up on the city bus in San Francisco on 3-card one time. I dropped $60 to him, just guaranteeing I was gonna get it one time, and he didn't. And that's a good analogy. Anybody who's ever been taken by a 3-card Montyist will know what you're talking about, and it's true because so anyway, that kind of goes into the whole, you know, aspect of trying to accept, and I'm even doing the same thing on Twitter with people with Bernie's announcement, right? Yeah. Because people, this one tweet that I put out just got this like 400, you know, engagements, people tweeting, and I mean, it was surprised me because it's abnormal. But so I'm looking through and I'm keeping my composure, right? Because I don't want to be arguing with people, and I'm telling people, listen, instead of talking about Kamala Harris and this candidate and that candidate, why you don't like them, start talking about why you support the candidate you support. And if it's Bernie, then you should be saying, look, I know there's other candidates. This is the way I'm approaching it. I know there's other candidates that have other that whatever. But the reason I'm this person is because of this. I do, you know, the hardest problem that Bernie has is his demographic. That's the biggest fallback he has. I saw a really good tweet and a meme shared of a tweet about, I wish Bernie was a millennial transgender black woman with
Christian.
A single Christian, single kid, Muslim, whatever. But he's not that. He's not those things, but he is the one that is carrying the lantern of what we really need. And even though, listen, I'm going to tell you, MMT people know that Bernie is irritating us. You need to know this because he keeps saying we need to raise taxes to pay for this and to pay for college.
His economist is an MMT guy.
Just
saying. I don't know why he does that. Sorry.
Stephanie Kelton, the leading economic activist for MMT, I would say she is, right? She's one of the leaders because she's been given that popularity face like AOC, right? Even though she wasn't one of the original ones, she's been given kind of the mantle. Well, she was his economic advisor.
That's what I forgot that it was her.
So we know that he knows, and she shakes her head and says, I don't know why he keeps saying it. But what some of us assume is probably because of the conventional thinking, right?
Yes. Because he needs more than just the voters that would accept it. He needs the ones that are ready to accept it.
That might change in the next couple of years because AOC stepped up and started making MMT part of the conversation. Now it's becoming mainstream. Maybe he'll finally get rid of the Robert Reich bullshit because Robert Reich
gets under my skin.
He is a neoliberal economist. Don't listen to him. He has it mixed up.
He's a literally little bastard.
Yes. And so it pisses me off about him too, because he has the right principles about doing things. But
I'm sure his heart's in the right place, but
right,
he's an economist. God damn it! Why is he doing that? Yeah.
Right.
No, and that comes from both sides. There's folks on the right and on the left that are just trying to keep you in the dust, right? Because the less you know, the easier you are to manipulate. So
divide and conquer. Divide and conquer.
The whole thing about why the Bible wasn't printed in out of Latin for centuries and centuries, because they didn't want the common people to be able to. They had to go through the checkpoints. They want you to go through the checkpoints. No, you don't understand the economy. You can't understand the economy. You're not savvy enough to understand. It has to go through the checkpoints of all these rich billionaires who have been manipulating the economy their whole lives, their families' lives. That's the checkpoint it has to go through. Bullshit. It doesn't, because the way the game is played now, there are many nuances into the financial industry, right? There's many nuances in how people can change loans, and how all that stuff. That gets into regulation. That gets into business and banking regulation, and of course we have the same economists that are and lawyers that are on top of what types of regulations that should be in place to make sure that we're protected from things that happened before, which we aren't now, right? We all know that it's worse now than it was before the crash.
Yeah.
But there are banking we don't have to have this sweeping tear down the banking system and rebuild the banking system. What we have in place is actually is okay. It's just been deregulated to the point that they're getting away with things. And Glass-Steagall is one of the biggest ones. You don't mix commercial banking with investment banking.
No, that's why it existed. But I have to, just to derail that a touch.
Yes.
And I want to end on a nice quote here. It's I just want to say, if you want to combat divide and conquer, you need to unite and empower. You need to fill people's heads with the right knowledge, not just hate them, but like you're saying,
right?
Post
knowledge
about what you're for, not about what you're against.
Right, but knowledge is the best vaccine for ignorance and fear.
Yep.
I like that one. Yep.
So,
and if Josh was here, he would say something really awesome about intolerance, and I'll probably put that clip at the end.
Okay.
Oh man, Mr. Akzam, it's been a pleasure. Everybody out there, we don't have t-shirts for sale, but for fuck's sake, go ahead and subscribe, hit the bell. We only do it every couple of weeks. It's not that hard.
That's right.
Take care.
Bye. I got.
We are
comments
recording.
about that album.
Wow.
I have had it with this motherfucker. You've been fucking me and my countrymen. Let's see if you like a taste of what you're giving everyone else. Cheerio like no tomorrow.
The paradox of tolerance says that a tolerant society cannot tolerate the intolerant because the intolerant will ruin the tolerance. In much the same way that, I may have been trained to shoot a human silhouette, but that was not before I was trained to respect the shit out of that weapon.